literally there was at least one that we know of Viking walking around with this big wraparound bathrobe cloak with a big poofy like pink colored fur trim on it. Like if
like
you
a
don't
boa around
if you're gonna tell me he didn't demand everyone refer to him as Queen, you're wrong.
Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Björn.
And we are Viking reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking Age shows.
So we're continuing the madness that is The Last Kingdom. Last week was all sorts of messed up and sad. So we're gonna keep going down the rabbit hole and get through season 4, episode 4.
Are you Saxon?
Well, I was born in Britain.
You will only find trouble here, brother.
You will find more than trouble if you do not let me pass.
It's a very rich red color.
Yeah, that was a really, really rich. I like that they're making a distinction between the Anglo-Saxons and like the Welsh Britons, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a ton about Welsh history. I don't know, that was like very old, like Celtic style of dress. I feel like it's weird. Like I feel like some of like the really early kind of Celtic stuff is like kind of reminiscent of Roman dress. So you mentioned that like the red they were wearing was like a very rich and like vibrant kind of color, and like vibrancy was a thing that you don't really think about in the Viking Age, in terms of like color palettes and stuff of that nature. But it was absolutely a thing. So, yeah, people kind of like have this idea of the Dark Ages being very like dismal and gray and bleak and dark for whatever reason. But it actually was kind of the opposite. I mean, like we know that people in the medieval ages like bathed and like took personal cleanliness and hygiene like pretty seriously, as opposed to everybody thinking that they're like grimy and gross and filthy and crusted in mud and filth. And like the kind of same thing is true of like color. So it was a way that you could kind of showcase your standing within society. Vikings like to wear wealth and they like to show off who they were and were very proud of like their lineage and things. And I mean, I'm talking about Vikings. These are
not Vikings.
Yeah, these are not Vikings, but I mean the same kind of principle would typically apply.
The way that fabrics and clothing and everything was made was different across cultures, but there was a lot of kind of cross-contamination between them.
Yeah, like a little bit of like assimilation.
Yeah, where like a very vibrant red like that or a deep purple color meant that you were rich, almost regardless of what culture you were from, just because of the difficulty that they had getting those colors.
The whole thing with the vibrancy is like the more wealthy you were, the more vibrant your clothes would be, because you could kind of afford to have not only like a rare pigment or something that's like very precisely made to get a very rich and like strong color, but also it meant that you could afford the cloth that was dyed first, because you wouldn't just dye like a shirt and then throw out the bath. You know, you dye multiple fabrics for as much as you kind of milk it as much as you could get.
Right.
And then by doing so over the whole process, I mean the pigment would become weaker and weaker, and you'd get kind of this whole like array of like fade into, you know, almost like blandness essentially.
Yeah.
And so by having wealth and being able to use that effectively, you would be able to afford and get the first batch of cloth from that dye. So it would be a very strong color, and that's just something that they took advantage of.
Right.
Like in the Viking Age, we hear that blues and reds were very common colors to kind of find. But like the strength of the color is going to be something that's really significant. So like a very pale kind of diminished blue is going to show that you might have some wealth here and there, but you're definitely not going to have be as high standing as somebody who has like a very vibrant kind of deep like woad blue essentially. And the same goes for the red. Like pink, I feel like I've heard was like a pretty relatively kind of common color in the Viking Age, because I mean red dyes and stuff were not plentiful, but they were you were able to find that a lot more often. But because of the process of making the dye and the strength of the pigment, you would often find kind of like washed out versions of it essentially. So it's more of like mid-tone shades and then like almost faded out to pink. And I really just want to stress Vikings wore pink. I really want to stress that a lot.
They were bad.
They
They were
wore it
they were so bad. They
Yeah.
were pink.
hot pink. Oh, love it. We talked a little bit about some of like the Clappenrock coats and things that they would wear sometimes in certain regions. And so part of that was on the trim, they found like a faux fur that was made out of wool, and that wool was actually dyed, and it would have had like a pink color to it. So it, literally there was at least one that we know of Viking walking around with this big wraparound bathrobe cloak with a big poofy like pink colored fur trim on it. Like if
Like
you
a
don't
boa around.
if you're gonna tell me he didn't demand everyone refer to him as Queen, you're f***ing wrong.
Give me the lady, and you will not be slaughtered.
Do not even consider it.
I will not have men murdered in my place.
I will not see you taken. Arrested!
Now, see, I just wanted to point out this is a much more like appropriate battering ram
I was gonna
than
say,
like a giant ram's head.
yeah.
Not to say that they couldn't make something like this is pretty ramjack quick, but like there's an in between, and
Yeah.
this is more believable like for the Viking age.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a couple of ropes. They have a log that they got off of a tree. Or almost looks like they got it out of a fire because it looks burnt.
Yeah, it looks like they just like tore down like a support beam.
Yeah, actually.
I like his axe.
Wait, which one?
That axe right there.
There's
Both?
two.
Oh yeah, both of them actually.
I think they're both the same, actually.
They look pretty similar.
Yeah,
I like them.
they're good.
Yeah, those are proper style Viking axes. Mm-hmm. And they're like made for war too, because like it's like minimalistic material for the actual head.
Mm-hmm.
So I say minimalistic. It's like it's just that they're using as little material to get as much as possible out of it. But
Right.
that's what I mean. But it has like it has the two flared ends, so it comes to a horn as well as the beard on either side. So it's like you're maximizing the length of the face of it, the cutting edge. So it looks from the angles that we can kind of see pretty thin. So that'd be something more specifically made for combat and for war, rather than like a splitting axe you might take and just bring with you to serve a purpose.
Yeah, so it's specifically a warrior's axe. It's not a farmer's axe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I like that. But yeah, I mean, anyway, so like, I'm not saying that like, oh yeah, the Vikings were really primitive and they couldn't think of anything better than this, but like, there's an in-between, there's a common ground between the two.
Yeah,
And I
I
feel
mean-
like this is just more appropriate for that kind of style.
Yeah, you also have to, consider the purpose. Did these people plan this attack for the last month that it took them to carve a horn's head just to use as a battering ram in case they came across a locked door, No, they just grabbed the first thing that they could and they're using that to smash the door down. It makes absolute sense.
Exactly.
Puppy.
Do not fear the beast. He's been fed.
Does he like strangers?
Only when cooked.
We follow the same one God and share a common enemy. You know that, Lord King. And you know to repel Canute now will save you bloodshed later. So it is a bargain that works for both of us. Mercians are gathering at Tettenhall. There are plans for Wessex to join them.
And what would I get in return? In this holy war against the pagans. And do not tell me recompense in heaven.
What is it you want?
The spoils of battle. All of them. Every last piece of Danish silver.
That is not a promise I have the authority to make.
You're here on Edward's orders. You must have his authority.
Sorry, I'm just looking at like the fabric and everything for his dress, his tunic. This seems pretty fair as far as my understanding of like the Welsh and stuff go. I think the Welsh are more of like a native Britain population. Like they're made up of more like native Brits as opposed to the Anglo-Saxons that kind of migrated over during the migration period. And there definitely was like a dichotomy and a kind of divorce of cultures or of relations between the two. I think they're more kind of closely tied with like you kind of see like the Scots and Irish, I feel like, where they're all kind of like a little bit more separated from like the heart of what we think is like England, you know. But they absolutely were Christianized at this time. I think one of the last pagan kings in England at the very least was like King Redwald, which is believed to be the Sutton Hoo grave, and that was in like the mid 600s, I think. But yeah, like by and large, like the island would have been converted to Christianity by that time. So you'd see like a lot of the Odinic cults or the Modenic cults that had kind of existed in the area were pretty much gone and replaced with Christianity. So they did absolutely share one crown, not one crown, but like one faith, which is like the main call for I feel like why they want to help the Anglo-Saxons, because essentially it's the same gambit that the rest of England faced, where you know Wales can sit out of it, but they're just another bastion that's going to fall to the Viking invasion, because that's happened in England. It's happened with Wessex, and this is their one chance before they just become the next pawn to fall, essentially.
Right.
I was looking at the fabric. It looked like it had some kind of patterning that I couldn't quite make out. It didn't look like a weave. It almost looked like a stamp or something that was put into it. It's kind of hard to see in the dim lighting. So I'm thinking maybe it's supposed to be like a silk, which definitely would have been substantial for somebody of his position, a king, to be fully decked out in. Like his cloak, his clothes kind of drape over him and like go all the way down to the floor, like they're touching. So it was a way to show off that you could afford that really rich pigment vibrant red that we talked about. It's a way that you could show that you could afford a luxury silk that's imported from a distant land, and that you could afford so much of it you can cover yourself entirely down to the ground, and still keep it clean as well. So that's just this whole reflection of, or this whole aspect of what the king is right now is just dripping with royalty and with expanse and with excess, essentially. And it would make sense for his little armored bodyguard there as well to kind of be similarly dressed, to show that they are, you know, directly supporting or answer directly to the king. So they'd also kind of wear that as a sign of their rank.
There's that spin stuff.
Yep. Fight choreography? I'm gonna touch on that again.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well, because we said that we were gonna keep an eye out for that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, spinning, not great.
Big sweeping, wide arcing movements, like it's like stage fighting. That's what it kind of looks like. It's very predictable, so that you can try to tell where the person's going, basically choreographing your movement to the person. So it's definitely something you would do on stage, or like sometimes in shows. But if you're trying to like portray like a really realistic, fast-paced kind of bout, especially like one-on-one like this, it's not gonna be like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could maybe explain it away by the fact that he was training him, so maybe in training they go a little slower. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing things out there.
Yeah.
That said, he's not training him very well. Just because on a battlefield, you would not be swinging your sword around like that, because it's probably going to get broken if you do.
Or your shield around that much either.
Yeah, or the shield, because shields are actually pretty darn heavy, honestly.
Yeah, after a bit of time, I feel like they can wear on
Yeah.
you. Like the typical Viking shield, at the very least, was like around like between like 8 to 12 pounds, roughly, give or take. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but
it doesn't sound like a lot. But you also have to keep in mind that you're using your non-dominant hand for it. You have your sword in your dominant hand, so one, you're using your weaker hand to hold the shield, and the last thing that you want to do is spend extra energy swinging it around so that you tire faster.
yeah, absolutely. Because especially in that last instance where like those big sweeping arcs with the shield, like to try to have to stop that movement suddenly and redirect it is just going to be exhaustingly draining.
Yeah.
So
You're
you
gonna
want
lose
to
control of it.
Yeah, so I mean, like you'd want to kind of try to mitigate those movements and keep yourself protected and covered, and just use the minimal amount of effort for the maximum potential, basically.
Yeah.
That's how we end up fighting at the very least. So, yeah, something with those big sweeping arcs is pretty choreographed and pretty obvious to me. I don't think the shields look like that either. The Saxon shields. So like at least looking at like art like the Bayeux tapestry or like grave finds that we have like from the Vandal period and like Tettenhall and everything, they're all still round shields essentially.
Mm-hmm.
They later on kind of developed more into that like tapered long shield that you see with the was it Romans with the Normans for like the horse riding. That kind of becomes like a full bodied shield, and then they kind of shorten and become like targes and stuff. But for the Anglo-Saxons, it would have been pretty similar to a Viking shield, that that typical kind of round shield that you see. I can understand why in the show they'd want to make that stark differential between the two opposing armies, because they do kind of like look similar in terms of like dress and everything, and so they'd want something to kind of at least tell the viewer who's who.
Right.
So I can understand that a little bit, just kind of looking for a different design, but it's a bad design. They're trying to, one, create a stark differential between the Anglo-Saxons and the Norsemen, and then two, use some kind of older Roman impression, because the Romans were in England way earlier, like hundreds of years earlier. So I don't think that culture exchange would have lasted for this long, especially being so far removed. Like they had Roman structures that they weren't even really too familiar with the history, and then we're just kind of like crumbling and left to fall apart. But this time you definitely just see more circular shield, like round shields,
Right.
for them.
Heston is a close ally of...
Did you say Heston?
Yes,
Keep
well, he's a
digging.
close- I know who he is! He is well known to be a liar!
You are nothing but a rat's turret, who should never have been trusted with anything more than an axe.
Besides, it is too late. Ethelflaed's fields are marching.
You had word of that, and did not tell me.
You were elsewhere making other plans.
Tell me that my sons live. I'll not harm you. Just tell me the news. Uhtred beheaded your eldest son. You would have killed Esgar. Had we not left.
I mean, he didn't give his word, I guess, that he wouldn't hurt him, but he did say that he wouldn't hurt him in front of a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, we all know he sucks.
Yeah.
Also, keep in mind, that's the voice of the Viking in Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's like he killed himself because he had Ragnarsson killed, but then he's like playing Ragnar Ragnarsson. I know that's not the character's name. Don't even start with me on that. It's a joke. He didn't swear that he wouldn't kill him, but he did say that he wouldn't. So that's a little bit besmirching of honor.
For the Viking culture back in that age, that would have been seen as a very dishonorable thing to do, because there were a lot of people around that heard him say that he wouldn't hurt him.
Yeah, you were only as good as your given word, essentially.
Yeah. And
So-
we had talked about that a bit
Yeah.
before on the
Yeah,
channel.
which is actually going back a little bit. It's the same thing with Heston, like a known liar. Like, you can't trust him because he's constantly lying.
Yeah.
And trying to manipulate the game for his best interest,
Yeah, and everyone knows it, so no one's going to listen to him except for idiots.
So this definitely is kind of questionable behavior. You can understand it as a modern audience because he's very emotional and it's like his son was killed. So, of course, he's going to lash out.
I'm sure you can
But-
understand it as any audience,
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
Like,
But a rumour persists that their marriage was legitimate. A false rumour.
But still one that could endanger my son when the time comes.
I trust you are keeping your husband satisfied.
I miss the days when people were just like decent people because they were decent people, not because they're trying to like swindle somebody or get something out of them.
when was that?
Anyways.
Ooh, I think we're going to see the ditch.
We'll see. Oh yeah, fair.
We'll
see.
What do I tell my men?
Tell them your brother's close behind us. They must believe they have a chance.
I mean, yeah, morale is important.
Yeah, you can't tell them that they're going to be screwed if they follow you into battle.
Hey guys, so we're getting ready. We're gonna start in about 10 minutes. We're by ourselves. Let's have fun. Yep.
So we do know, as far as the Battle of Tettenhall goes, we do know that the armies of Wessex and Mercia were together on it, and they went into battle together. There's really no accounting of the Welsh being there, so
Yeah.
that's kind of a side tangent.
Yeah.
The thing that they do get right, though, is that Aethelflaed was the one that was leading the Mercian armies instead of her husband.
Yeah, the Lady of Mercia.
Yeah, and this is one of, if not the big battle that she's credited with for saving England, because the Battle of Tettenhall was basically like the beginning of the end of the Viking invasion.
The end of the beginning.
Yeah, not the end of the Viking invasion, but
Yeah.
this was the first big battle that started the domino effect to the Vikings essentially
Yeah, it was that.
leaving.
Yeah, it was that first big push back against them to kind of regain footing and control in the region.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the start of that great upheaval of just casting them out.
Yeah, in this battle, the Danes definitely lost out big. I think there were 2 kings that they lost in that battle that were leading the armies.
Yeah, so according to most of what we know is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, and there isn't a ton that we know about the tactics or anything. This wasn't a detailed accounting. It was pretty much a summary, on Spark Notes.
This is what happened.
We don't know who led the English side of things. We know Ethelflaed was there, and then the Wessex army as well.
Well, she was. The armies were allied from Ethelflaed and Edward,
right,
as brother and sister.
Right.
That's why there was that alliance.
Right, exactly. So they obviously had a stake in it, and then on the north side they were led by 3 kings, and yeah, the account, the chronicles kind of state that the losses were massive, in the thousands, and 2 of the Norse kings were killed on the battlefield. The last one retreating.
Yeah, but it doesn't say names, I don't think.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think names are mentioned.
Yeah, but yeah, there's not a lot that we know about besides that it happened, who was generally who was there, and then who won. So in terms of tactics or how they go about it, it's up for grabs. And I'm excited to see how they kind of use that with this. I'm interested to see if they try to pull from other historical accounts and things. He is a pale-looking dude.
He really is. I think he would have burned by now.
His hair did.
Ooh, here we go.
Release the horde.
With a few more men, it's stand a chance.
I also like how they just arrived there and we're just well, we'll just wait for our adversaries here.
That's what they did.
I know, it's just hilarious to me. They're just we're here to battle. Where are people
Well, I
to
mean,
battle?
they've done that. They pretty much did that up until World War One, essentially. They would arrive. Battles were scheduled. It had to be convenient. There was honor and integrity and it's insane that you would think that you expect that it'd just be 2 people wandering and then and kill each other. That's not what it used to be like.
No,
you
had to get
that happened.
armies.
Yeah, that happened at times, but no, for larger conquests like this and everything, even through all throughout the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, up until relatively recent human history, we had scheduled times to kill each other. It's so insane. We see it famously in Egil Saga when Egil's side is trying to vie for time basically against the huge aggressor, and he keeps lying and sending messengers back to try to buy more time for them, and had people pitch multiple tents that were empty to make it look like they had more soldiers so that they could wait and stall for the rest of the army to arrive before the battle was to take place.
Right.
And it's insane, like the amount of like manipulation and stuff like behind the scenes went into scheduling warfare. Like you could use that kind of to your advantage to not even have the battle and have them just kind of forfeit and surrender. To be like, hey, look, I got all my bros pimped out, ready to slaughter you. Or you can just concede, give us money in your territory, and we can walk away from this. Which is why Egil at the time was vying for more
Pitching the
time.
tents, yeah.
Yeah, vying for more time, because at the time they had like half as many people as the opposing army. But to drag it out and stall as much as he could, they were able to get the force gathered to have a proper battle.
And can you imagine if your allied army just like took a wrong left turn in the forest?
What can a man do to me? Nothing. For you have delivered my soul from death.
That was bad CGI. We survived.
Of course you did. As a main character.
I've seen it happen a day on top of you, but honestly, I've seen pretty.
Just punched his axe into him. Oh, look. Look who else is there.
Oh, look who it is.
Even the Welsh.
Hold out, please.
You Saxons.
Yeah. That was brutal.
Just kind of wanted to note that there seems to be a lot of either two-handed swords here or swords that are not two-handed that are just being used that way.
Yeah.
Because in order to have a two-handed sword, the sword would be larger essentially, but also like the handle of it would be longer to allow for that. And a lot of the swords in the Viking Age did not have handles that were long enough, hence the shield sword combination.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like typically you see the shield being dropped and the sword being used in two hands in later periods. I think from like I want to say like the 14th century and upwards, because armor became more prevalent and more widespread. So you would basically end up dropping your shield because you were able to afford armor that was pretty much like fully encompassing, that you see later on like suits of armor for that purpose. And because you were so armored, you could then use both hands to deal destructive damage. So
to the other person's armor.
Exactly. So then you start to see like massive pole arms like halberds and glaives and war hammers and also two-handed swords and big axes and stuff being wielded, because you also needed to be able to do that, you know, high intensity damage to get through the person's armor essentially, or be able to kind of manipulate things better because you only had very limited areas to target, because so much was just leaden with plate mail and things. And I'm thinking very much later on in the period, but that started to develop only a few hundred years right after the Viking Age, is when these advancements started to really come to fruition.
Right.
There are very few accounts from the sagas where we do hear about, you know, a sword occasionally being used with two hands to put like a lot of force behind the blow. Swords at the time were really only made for one-handed use. The grips themselves were only about 4 inches long or so. So as this is an example, this is my very dinged up version of a Swedish sword from the later part of the 10th century. The grip itself is only about 4 inches long, so it really only has room for one hand to hold it. You do hear there are some accounts in the sagas written where at times somebody would wield a sword in two hands to get like more of a powerful, swing basically into it to like chop through a limb or an entire body or a shield or something. But there's not room on the sword to really comfortably do that because you don't want to hold the pommel. That's just going to be really awkward and prevent you from really kind of following through and going to the blow. So most probably they'd either,
they'd cup the hand.
Yeah, they'd either cup the hand or Bill Short references that they might actually keep the hand on the back of the wrist to help drive straight down and put more of like a pushing force behind your blow as well. So this is a little bit of like a later period sword. So again, like the blade itself is a little bit wider. The cross guard is kind of starting to take that a little bit of a longer and more of like an upward kind of slope to it. But by and large, it's the same all around in terms of grip size, weight, and length and everything. Based on what we saw here, there's a lot of just kind of wild swinging and reckless abandon, and I think that's more because they don't want their stars of the show to carry shields because they don't want to cover anybody up, and that is a bit frustrating because a shield is so integral to combat.
Well, it's the same argument for not having your stars wearing helmets.
Which is also so integral to combat.
Yeah, so basically...
Because then the shit with Starpo wouldn't have happened.
He probably would have gotten dinged up even with a helmet from that blow.
Oh, no, yeah, without a doubt, but it wouldn't have just been like a watermelon, like...
I feel like, if anything, I can understand the argument for not wearing helmets if you want your stars' faces to be seen. At least, maybe give them a little bit more of a decorated helmet that could still look period, so you could tell who's who. But in the fast battle, it can be really difficult. You want to pick out those human features.
I wouldn't even care so much if they had it for like literally scripted every single battle somehow their helmet went flying off.
That's
like,
fair.
Literally, if they just like took the helmet and like threw it down or like got knocked off or like I wouldn't care if it happened every single battle the same exact way. At least they went in wearing it.
That's true.
Like, it'd be ridiculous of like, oh my god, but then also like, well, good lucky thing they were wearing the helmet that first time, because then they would have just died. The helmet saved them. I accept the most basic of cop-outs.
Yeah.
For it, really.
Yeah, and
if somebody's
I
willing
think,
to do it.
And I think that the shields, using that same argument for the shield is a little bit of a stretch because you can still see who's who with the shields.
I mean, look at Lagertha. Like, she whipped her shield around all over the place and everything. And, like, they train with the shields, whipping the shields around, but they just don't use it
That's why I was surprised that Edward even didn't have a shield. He was one of the people that was using his sword as a two-handed sword and no shield whatsoever. Just climbed off his horse and charged into the battle.
I just want to speak really quickly on the horse pit thing. So that is kind of loosely based on an account of a Battle of Paris in the mid-late 800s, I think. There's actually an account from a chronicle a Frankish chronicle that I'm spacing on the name of exactly. The chronicle tells us that the Vikings actually feigned a retreat at one point to lure the cavalry out because the easiest time to cut down an opponent is when they're fleeing, because they're focused on just running away from you. Their back's turned. There's really no risk of you getting injured by them because they're not going to like flail behind them as they're running. It's like biologically weird, and it's going to slow you down and have you get overrun. So oftentimes when you're retreating, you get pursued to be cut down, and the Vikings relied on that. So they actually staged an attack and then feigned a retreat to lure the cavalry regiments out from where they were. But they had set up these large dugout pit that they had covered over. So as they ran back, the cavalry ran into it and fell and got decimated there. And just broke apart. So they were able to wipe out that whole regiment, essentially. They were able to wipe out the cavalry without having to really cause too much of a problem to them. It was brilliant. So I think that this scene that we kind of saw is based a little bit around that account, which is cool. It's what I was talking about with the mix of the historical stories, because we didn't really have an account of how battle tactics went in Tettenhall, and it's nice to see them actually relying on other historical accounts to kind of fill that void and
fill in the blanks.
Exactly, and make a good story. You know, and still maintaining some degree of historical accuracy.
Right.
It's really good to see. Yeah, get hit. If he was wearing a helmet, it wouldn't have been a problem.
You killed my firstborn. It was fair revenge for Ragnar.
That's one way to find out.
Ragnar was weak.
You sent S04 to kill Ragnar?
Because we're destined to be together. You know this. Please, we're not.
Your boys live. The body your man saw was mercy and killed by Danish hands.
Both alive.
Both. But you'll not live to see them grow old.
That was awesome.
That was impressive.
That was so... I just love the little, like, what? And also, like, to build off of what you were saying a little bit earlier with when he killed the guy for bringing the news. I don't know if you cut it, but he said oath. So he gave his oath that his child was still alive. And you know, based on Uhtred's reputation, that you can take his oath when he gives it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So just the little details are great.
Timing on
the little
that was
details are great.
amazing.
And yeah, 100%. Oh.
Something I kind of want us to touch on a little bit, not that we saw a lot of it here, but oftentimes we do hear in stories of battles or fights that basically end with two opponents disarming each other, and what happens then is they basically go into wrestling mode, or as in the Viking Age they actually called the Glima. It was a Viking Age form of wrestling. There were two different forms of Glima. Specifically, there was one that was more of a sports Glima, where, and that's actually still more or less practiced in Iceland these days. That's an official sport for them.
Yeah, so reconstructed, it's a little bit more refined, so it's more like a gentlemanly form of Glima. Where you actually have like two belts, like one around the thigh and one around the waist that you grip onto for like the proper stance. But like sport Glima during the Viking Age would be a lot more free form. The only real thing that differentiated it from the other form, which is combat Glima, was that you're not trying to kill the person actively. But yeah, you would incorporate like grappling and like kicks, slaps, punches, and things. All in sport Glima, and in combat Glima.
Combat Glima was much more freeform, obviously, because then you're just basically wrestling your opponent to the death.
Yeah, and like knives are often involved, which is, you know, if you lose your arm, you're going to wrestle them, try to get a good position, and then draw your sacks to kind of finish them off quickly.
Yeah, so in here what we kind of saw was a little bit of that, but they were mostly just going for choking each other instead of really doing much else.
Yeah, this was more of like a full-on kind of like bro out thing.
Yeah.
This is like a bar brawl, is what we saw.
Yeah, basically.
Which is, it's interesting. We talked a little bit about this in one of the Viking episodes, because they did that early on.
Yeah, they were doing sports Glima.
Yeah. In that, I mean, we only saw little bits of it here and there in Vikings, but they did kind of go about it more appropriately with like the kind of like stances and like grips and movements, whereas this was very much just like a kicking, shoving, choking brawl.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, in Vikings it was sports Glima with a crowd that was cheering and there was drinking going on and it was a party, whereas here it's, you know, just trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
So very, very different. But at the same time, like, it would have been nice to actually see some of that incorporated, maybe some more wrestling maneuvers or something like that, instead of just get him on the ground and, you know, choke him and then roll around for a bit and then choke him again.
Exactly, yeah. And there are like some modern Glima combat schools that like teach that form of wrestling. So it would have been nice to see some of the more like appropriate like takedowns and like tripping maneuvers and things. So it would have been nice to see, but we didn't see it. But it's reminiscent of it.
Yeah.
We pretty much said all we can about it.
Send me to Valhalla.
I will take you as a prisoner.
That's worse than death, please. I cannot be a slave. Let me die with honor here on the battlefield.
Oh, wow.
You owe me that, Uhtred. I want to be with Ragnar. Please, Uhtred.
She's also pregnant.
Yeah, that also adds to it.
It is an honor to meet you.
And I am pleased you were able to make the battle, Lord.
Well, we would not have won without you and your men. I'm most grateful.
And your generous rewards are appreciated. Your priest conveyed to me your kind offer of the spoils of battle.
And no more favors. The people of Wales do not need Saxon help.
Seek to be loved by all. Chronicled for your bravery, no matter if it costs the blood of men. It's not true. Yes, it is. You've chosen Mercia over the kingdom of Alfred. I suggest you do not return south for a long time.
It is over for us, brother.
Move! Stand aside! Lord Ethelred is wounded! Fetch your healer!
Actually, let's stay. You know what? I'm gonna unpack my bags again. I thought that was a good episode. There were a fair amount of inconsistencies with costuming that we always see. I feel like they're taking a lot more liberties now than they have before.
Kind of comes and goes in waves. I think overall the episode was good.
Yeah.
They took some liberties with the battle from what we know of it, but they also kind of tried to include some other historical moments in there.
Yeah. And it was still kind of like historically sourced, and beyond that one kind of maneuver, it was very much like a straightforward kind of like just clash with like some of the other forces that we knew were there, kind of filtering in later on, to kind of like in the 11th hour.
Yeah.
For that dramatic effect.
Yeah, I kind of expected Edward to show up at the last minute.
I was worried they were going to try to like swap around the history a little bit further, so they kind of replaced the Wessex soldiers with Ethelred's, but then they just kind of had everybody conglomerate, which was an interesting touch.
Yeah, I mean, the thing out of left field was definitely the Welsh, because in the accounts that we do have, they were not there, as far as I know. So that was kind of a random throw in just to cause more drama.
Yeah, a little bizarre.
With them stealing all of the silver.
Pretty much.
Just to piss off Edward more.
Yeah, and making him look weak in front of everybody too.
Yeah, I know I said this the last time, but I'm looking forward to seeing Edward's growth and seeing if he's going to clamber out from under that bad counsel that he's getting right now and actually grown to the leader that we know he was historically.
Yeah, I'm hoping they do that soon, because we're almost at the halfway mark, and I'm starting to get a little bit worried about his attitude. But overall, it was pretty good. I think I'm just gonna kind of keep mine level at the 6 again. You know, because this one it was a little bit back and forth for me, and just like the kind of way they went about the combat, it was like a little bit boring of a battle, honestly.
It was kind of straightforward, just swing at each other and die.
Exactly, yeah. Like, they had the one pit at the beginning, and then it was just like, all right, now people got to walk through the pit, even though all of their horses jumped right over it when they first got there. So you'd think, like, once it's exposed, the rest of the horses could just jump over and, like, plow into people and stuff. And we saw that once in Sterpa, which was cool. It was very Game of Thronesy.
Despite the Welsh being thrown in randomly in there, I do feel like the story behind the battle and everything is there. Like, even past, Ethelred's drama and Edward's drama and all of that stuff. Like, ultimately, we had the Wessex army and we had the Mercian army there. And who knows, you know, like history wrote it as an alliance, but it could have happened this way. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, history is written by the winners, so even though we kind of are led to believe that, you know, yeah, the Wessex kind of like led the charge and everything like that, it very well could have been saved to the last minute. Kind of like we saw with Alfred coming to Uhtred's aid in that one battle where they kind of like waited off in the woods and we're just like, we'll let them die a little bit more. It's fine. Teach them a lesson, you know? It could have been like a very similar situation for that.
Yeah, like we just have no way of knowing. So those types of liberties taken by the show and by the books,
Yeah.
I don't know how this was written in the books. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, same.
I'm not going to knock it down. Obviously, we had a couple of big missteps in the whole thing. I'm going to bring mine up to a 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that's all we got.
Cool.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we will see you in the next one.